Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue, and today is episode 91. Yes, it's out of order a little bit, but we keep the numbers anyway. The topic is powering continuous identity with OAuth and OpenID. Our quick reminder, if you want to support the live stream, just please follow us on LinkedIn. That really helps us. Our guest today is Sean Odell, co-chair of the OpenID Shared Signals Group. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Pleasure to be here.
So before we dive into the topic at hand, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career trajectory and how you became sort of an expert in digital identity?
Well, thank you for that. For considering me an expert in digital identity. Very humbling. A lot of smart people in the industry, but pleasure to be as part of that group. So I started kind of traditionally to most engineers and architects, where my base was in software engineering. Did a lot of stuff with, every domain you can think of, truckload, insurance, logistics, timeshare, and even entertainment. Got big into authentication and access because they were like, well, what can they see in this page if they're a CSR or a CSM? And I'm like, oh, access, pretty interesting. That quickly went from software engineering to, you also have a good background in availability and uptime in building dynamic large-scale systems. So my background is software engineering, SRE, and highly available systems. Identity needs to be up and available at most of the time, otherwise you can't log into stuff and access things. That quickly traversed into, authentication, authorization, privilege access, attestation, more IAM buzzwords. So software engineering, lump identity into it. So I was an identity engineer, not an engineer who practices identity. There's a big difference, to where now what I am is I traverse over the consumer and workforce spaces, both engineering, architecture, and I would even layer in product and vision. So where I'm going next is bringing the maturation of like event-driven architecture and event-driven and engineering to identity, which puts us nicely into the title of this episode, Continuous Identity, powered by OAuth and OIDC. So kind of where I came from, software, architecture, figure out a lot of hard problems in a very, very, very always changing domain. And then now it's layered on how do we keep it going? How do we keep ahead of the needs of the business and the curve of the globe, pretty much.
I'm going to take a weird direction towards this topic and start probably in a place you wouldn't expect. But your working group defines this thing called the security event token. What is a security event token? And do we have so many JWTs? Do we really need another specialized JWT?
Can never have too many of them. You need more. Security event token. It is a self-contained object. To not get into the abyss of JWT technology for your listeners, it's a self-contained object that describes something, person, place, object, IP address, and what happened, like what event happened to it. Is it going to be either like a session revoke, or your assurance has changed, or your account's been disabled, or your account's been enabled? So it's more like action, context, and time, if you will. That's the highest level I can explain what a set is, a security event token, but it's a form of a JWT, but it's a type of security event token. And you can layer in SCIM into this, risk, which stands for, I think it's risk incident sharing coordination, and then CAEP, which is continuous access evaluation profile.
Right. Okay. So we have this new token, and we're seeing a lot of new tokens in the industry. It reminds me a little bit of a transaction token, which sort of has a container and a payload, and that payload is very varied. But we also have status list tokens, a new JWT that actually contains the status of a token, whether it's revoked or not, or potentially other metadata. So in OpenID protocols, we tend to have tokens and endpoints. Like OpenID Connect, we have the ID token and the user info token. and we leverage other tokens like the access token, but we have tokens and we have endpoints. OpenID Connect defines like the authorized endpoint and the user info endpoint. So we talked about the token, the set token for shared signals. What are some of the endpoints that the working group is defining?
So you can either pull from or push to in a shared signals framework. So the push to, your endpoint is pretty much not prescriptive in the spec because it's implementation specific. Like you could have like your fully qualified base URL and then you have /events, for example. So if you want people to push to you as a receiver, there's your endpoint, here's your signed JWT, and then you can receive them. Transmitting as well, this is a little complicated, but if I as a transmitter wanted to allow you to pull from me, your stream has its own endpoint where you would pull from, because I wouldn't want to, like, as they say in Ghostbusters, don't cross the streams, right? Your stream is different from person X's stream or person's Y stream, but that gets set up when you start subscribing to events and or subjects, if you will. That's one of them, and then there's always the well-known endpoint that gives you all the stream config, what events you have there, properties, events supported. So it's no different than like your well-known endpoint when you're doing anything with OpenID, but no different in shared signals.
Okay. Are there any open source implementations of transmitters of events out there?
I know there's 2 of them. I believe there's more, but the two that I would personally recommend, CAEP.dev, CAEP.dev is a great open source. It's written in Go. I do believe you've had him on this podcast. Mr. Mike Kaiser is working on one, and he will be remiss if I don't say this about that. Caveat emptor, like, you can use it, but he himself will tell you he's not the best coder, if you will. So, but I do know that those are 2 of them coming, 2 of them that are out in the wild right now. There's a few more. I do know that we have something on the working after December, when this goes actually V1. There's going to be a notion called a transceiver for a reason, to support mainly to support both push and pull events for various use cases, but also to help support the SCIMStat working group over in IETF. There will be more open source projects available that will give you the option of being a transmitter and receiver, or just a transmitter or a receiver. Shameless plug, sharing is caring. If you transmit, you should receive. If you receive, you should transmit. But there will also be this third option that says you could be a transceiver. So that way, like, Mike, if you wanted to pull from me, I could also push to you, or vice versa, right? That's very reconciliation approach for closing of the loop. But there's that. Cape.dev, though, great resource, very great.
Okay, so I'm curious. Let's talk about the receivers. So I'm an application and I want to receive information like this session is no longer valid and you should log out. It's hard to get. It's easier to sort of build the infrastructure than to get the consumption of this new thing. We saw that with UMA, right? There's a lot of UMA servers, but there weren't a lot of UMA clients. What is the ask for what is the ask for the RPs to do in this ecosystem?
It's actually a great question, and it's centered around adoption and how do you make it easy to use. So in this state, what you're saying, the RP or the receivers, if you don't have this easily packageable, it won't be readily consumed. So a lot of SaaS products are starting to hop on board on this, and we've witnessed this in multiple Gartner interops right now. There's a lot of companies pushing shared signals into their product. I know of many to remain analogous here. I know Okta has it. I know there's other stuff coming with Apple has it, and there's more in the works, if you will. So go back to your question though. I think it's less about receiving it and more about building, and this is a pun on purpose, a capability matrix. That's CAEP, capability matrix,
Yes.
that is trademarked. Insert the quarter into the jar every time you say it, right? So when you receive an event, what does that map to your underlying business logic? So let's take your app, your app, for example, Mike. If you have an endpoint called, I don't know, revoke access, whenever you receive a session revoke set security event token that hits your endpoint, you would transpose that from, here's this set that contains a body of stuff and a subject that says Sean, right? Sean could be an email, it could be an opaque ID, it could be a UUID, it could be an ID that you have shared between two parties. Comes to you, you map that to your endpoint, and you say, fine, Sean's revoked, I'm out. Now you're going to ask me, that sounds great. How do you do that? You need a lightweight receiver to be distributed into applications that's fully built on, Terraform, CDK, however you want to manage your infrastructure. You need more of this on high sensitive systems, for example. Implementing a receiver is not that hard. It really isn't. Transmitting is very hard. Receiving, not that hard, honestly. A lot of the open source projects that are
Because when you're transmitting, I just want to flesh this out a little bit. When you're transmitting, you need to create a JWT. You need to sign that JWT. You need to publish your keys. You need to rotate your keys. So all of those things. Correct. You're minting tokens, let's say.
Correct. So as a receiver, it's no different. Like, this is going to sound really crazy, but most modern systems can receive a JWT and validate it. There's tons of packages out there that can do that, tons. The difference between a security event token and a regular JWT is in the header. You have sec events plus JWT, kind of like what you're talking about with status lists, same difference, right? Once you get it in there though, that's the easy part. The hard part is your system asynchronous? Are you event driven? Are you synchronous? Do you only have one API? Are you in one region? Are you highly available? Where is your state persisted in your application? Is it in a database? Is it in memory? Is it just killing a cookie? Those are all great questions, but that comes back down to your capability matrix. When the event comes in, you're different, I'm different, person Z is different, person Y is different. So taking an easy example, if you had a stateful representation in a NoSQL database like Dynamo, kill your session, easy. An even easier one is drop the cookie server side if you're using cookies for that. But again, the receiver part, very easy. And the transmitter part, you also hit on something very important, Mike. The transmitter, why it's a little bit more difficult, subject. Who are you? Or is it an email? Is it your ID you set up with SSO? A lot of this is very tied to SSO as well. So when you onboard your app, OIDC, for example, what is your subject? Because whatever I send you as the RP and the subject, you're going to persist that somewhere to say, this is Mike. Mike's, for sake of argument, Mike's number is, his ID is 3. If I send you a set with your email, you're like, I don't know who Mike, who is this? I have no clue who this is. But if I say, hey, Mike is 3, do it. Now, there's a feature in the subject area of sets where you can send complex subjects, also called aliased, where I can send multiple subject attributes that says Mike's email is this, Mike's ID is this, as long as it doesn't deviate from you as a person. So I can't say, oh, it's Mike and Sean in one set. That's a violation of security. You shouldn't do that. It should just be always about Mike. However, I can identify you from an RP perspective.
So the transmitter has to be identity aware, and it has to, in a way, it has to know, really be part of the OpenID infrastructure in a way, because OpenID, for example, sends pairwise identifiers to protect privacy. So it has to know how it calculated the subject identifier, just for the RP to be able to act on that. Yeah, that's a good point.
So you went there though on the PPID. So pairwise identifiers, I call them PPIDs for sure because it's way too much to say. You went there. I think on the consumer use cases, that's how you can effectively share data without getting lawyers very upset. Yeah. So if you have two companies that need share information,
pairwise is too long. The previous name was persistent non-correlatable identifiers. So pairwise always seemed really pithy to me.
PNC IDs, PPIDs. I like PPIDs better. I agree. Yes, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think PPIDs have a very very bright future in the consumer space, but it also comes back down to, like, you hit it nail on the head. Integrating between two disparate companies is very important, because I've preached this till I'm blue in the face. Standards will set you free. If you follow the standards, things are easy. If you think you're a snowflake and you're like, I can do my own spec, we've all been there. There's a bunch of smart people in
Yeah,
this industry. Go read it. I'm telling you, it's
yeah.
like
If
eye-opening
you
when you're
don't
like,
follow
standards.
standards, it's called enterprise.
Exactly.
Um, so I want to push back on something you said before. You said validating tokens is easy, um, but let me
Easier.
tell
I
you
said
why
I
I
said
actually
easier.
think
I said easier, I
easier,
hope.
definitely easier than minting them. But I want to push back on that a little bit, because what I see from my perspective is you're right. Validating signatures is easy as long as we know we can grab the JWKS from the URI and get the keys. Like that part is trivial.
Mhm.
Um, but it's validating the contents that gets tricky, because a JWT will have an expiration, it'll have an NBF, and what we're finding is that with the proliferation of tokens, that the cognitive load on developers is higher, because we're saying, well, this is the valid what an access token looks like. Here's the content. Here's the ID token, and of course, yeah, it means a subject, and here's a transaction token, here's a set token, here's a software statement, here's a FIDO attestation, here's a Google attestation. So the cognitive load on developers to understand what the contents of that, even though we're aligning with standards, as you say, what I find when I talk to developers is that they conflate access tokens and ID tokens and user info tokens. They don't know about other types of tokens, and none of them are checking for revocation today. To be fair, revocation isn't final yet. OAuth Status List isn't final, although it should be shortly. But the reason it's easy is because most developers, I would say, don't do a very good job at validating. They just validate the signature. They don't adequately validate the contents, and they don't even know they're supposed to validate the revocation. So validation should be a three-step process, and developers are only really doing one of those steps well. And any thoughts about the challenges you see from developers on, cognitive load of JWTs and the various types of them out there?
A lot there. From a shared signals perspective, a set perspective, uh, it's a lot different than a regular jot. So for example, there's no expiry. It doesn't. It's fire and forget. So just want to put that out there real quick.
It happened.
Valid, exactly, because to get adoption, you can't be. It is the implementer's choice to be prescriptive or not. Some companies will be like, yes, we're prescriptive. Some are like, well, here's some information, right? Because what I tell you is important. You're like, it's Sean. He's chatty. I don't want to trust him. But Atul over there, oh, his stuff is right. So you may treat Atul's stream as prescriptive and mine as like, it's informative. Thank you, right? Just giving you an example. But back to your point, I find that there are, I'm gonna say two with the right to say three at the very end. There are two classes of developers here, engineers, if you will. Ones that want to write it themselves, they miss a lot. And ones that use SDKs, packages, libraries, includes, that do all of it for you and make it easy for you, mapping wise, it's easier. And the third is the savant that just knows the whole spec inside and out, which is great. I personally, coming from an engineering background, validating JOTs and the contents of it is not bad if you know your source and what to expect. But that plays to your point of, you can shove a lot of stuff into an access token. Like all the required claims are great, but there's things saying that you can't shove 20,000 more things into it, to your point. Like this is really
Yeah.
the subject, but this is like subject 2, subject 3, subject 4. I don't have a good answer for you, except for training and education. It's huge in the engineering community. And if you're not learning constantly, you're falling behind. So you should always keep up to speed on it. But getting to a common token for everyone to use is nirvana. I hope when that's figured out, I'm retired, because it seems like a very long pull. But like you mentioned a lot of things like transaction tokens. I think that has a good place, honestly. Even status list looks sense. I'm really big on selective disclosure JWTs. That could make the prevalence of more JWTs better, because you wouldn't have companies say, here's a JWT token, here's a JWE, which is an encrypted JWT, versus package it all into one. But then this is where status list comes in. Like if I put many JWTs into one, makes it easier, but does it? That's an open question. I don't have an answer for that. I don't.
Yeah, and I actually come out sort of in the opposite direction, where I think we actually don't need to ask developers to learn more about JWTs. I think we need to ask them to learn less, and that we need to move these JWT validation rules, especially about the contents, which might change over time. Like we might add a new claim and then say, when we send you this new claim, it means you should do this. I really think we need to formalize the mapping at the identity architect level to the policies between the tokens and the policies, and have the developers obtain the tokens, but then move to token-based access control, where we have declarative policies that say, based on this bundle of tokens, based on these security event tokens, transaction tokens, access tokens, ID tokens, you've toned me all these tokens, and now I know that with these policies that I have mapped to it, should I be allowed to do this action on this resource? But I say take the load off of the developers and move it to the architects who are making the policies where it belongs, and just make sure that the developers know how to obtain the tokens they're supposed to obtain. That's my take on it. Any thoughts?
It's interesting. I read both your articles on LinkedIn at least 2 or 3 times each, just to resonate and sink in.
The first one was written by ChatGPT. So the first one, I had this idea. I was taking out the compost. I was like, you know what? Token-based access control, that's what we need. I put it into ChatGPT, and it generated this article. I edited it a little, and it got 10,000 views. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's one of my best posts. And then I actually wrote the second one myself and said, this idea needs further fleshing out. And I really dove into it, and I started talking to people about it. And a lot of people said, oh, we're already doing that. And in fact, I see shared signals as evidence of this, where you basically said, we can't use role-based access control. That's just not going to work. We need to define new tokens, which are input to policy. So sorry to interrupt,
No, you're spot on. I think your shared signals has a bright future. It really does. I think there's plays into this with MDLs, with VCs, even with policy, right? So the one, I'm going to veer a little bit off topic here just for a second, Mike, if you don't mind.
Please.
Think of shared signals as a trust framework and how you can orchestrate things, because the security events tokens have a schema. You can define your own event types and events. Like there's a need in consumer for like consent. I'm consenting to use Nest, for example, with Google. Good example. Or I'm consenting to link accounts with this third-party provider from my Facebook account, which great.
I actually just raised that consent could be handled in transaction tokens. I was just talking to Eve about that, by the way. Maybe we should profile UMA for transaction tokens. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, but I think there.
So you could put that in set tokens too, in a way, is what you're saying?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And I think it's, how do I share the consent with somebody else could be via set. How do I see? I view transaction tokens more ephemeral in nature, because that's what they're used for. This is more of like an auditability, saying Mike's app, Sean's app. Mike consented, Sean consented. Here's a stamp. Here's a stamp. That way the auditors are happy, compliance is happy. And that way, if you ever want to do like a right to be forgotten, it's like, okay, remove Sean's stuff, remove Mike's stuff, and this is where PPIT comes in. I veered off topic for a reason. Remind me again, because I went completely ADD and hamster.
I distracted you. So we were talking about token-based access control and how these tokens are used for input. Um, and you're saying, well, set could actually, you could define a number of schemas for different things, even consent potentially.
Correct.
And I think that that's true. It's funny because transaction token just says, here's a way to deliver a payload. And that payload could be anything. It could be very granular, or it could be a delegation. It could be like, I agree for my parent to be able to see my medical information or
Correct.
something, or my grades in college. But yeah, and CAEP, I guess, profiles some specific, here's some common things that we know that we need. We know we need to expire sessions. We know we need to revoke tokens. Although I think I like the token revocation status list better than a security event token per se as a
I
way to
think
do it.
I think they're used in different use cases. For example, one can be more prescriptive and one can be more, I need to go check. It's just, we can dive into use cases for days for that, but I think both may have a place. I do. I do know that.
One thing I would say is that the status list is only pull. The IDP publishes a new status list JWT on the endpoint, and the client must pull it. There's no
So
push. There's no endpoint to
let me
push it
pause
to.
you on that. This is where they both come in together, and I'm pausing you for a great reason. I'm not trying to overstep you by any
Sure.
means. It's more the shared signals transmitter pushes to the IDP that says revoke the session. IDP updates status list, clients consume from status list. That's a great abstraction. It's a great facade, but that's how you can see how they work together for the common good. That's exactly what I was talking about. So great example. It's almost like you set that up, but I promise you, this was not rehearsed by any means whatsoever.
Yeah. What's interesting about status list is that it's very concise. So it's 132 or one. I'm bad at, like, I'm not an actual computer scientist. I just play one. So it's 132 or byte of object, and each bit corresponds to the status of a token. Um, and I had the authors of the spec on, Paul and Christian, and they said, when we looked at certificate revocation, there was a lot of metadata around certificate revocation, but we realized that the one thing that the people most wanted was just, was it active or not? And they're like, we could just make one bit in this byte of data that corresponds to each JWT. So that was where they started. But then they said, actually, what we could do is let you reserve 4, 8, or 16 bits in case you were signaling different things. So maybe you have a revoked, a paused, or I don't know. You can basically convey different events using the bits, but it's all about the compactness of the data. And one question I was going to ask you about this shared signal is that it seems very infrastructure-y. But today, a lot of the applications are running in the browser or the mobile, and so it's too much data in a way to like. Well, first of all, to transmit or push messages, a mobile app would need some type of URI where you could, and then it would be too much work for the transmitter to push out to all the mobile app URIs. So it seems like, plus they don't really have network addresses. They don't have stable IP addresses or host names. Same thing for browser-based applications like React or Angular. So do you
Mhm.
see shared signals as as just an infrastructure? And do you have any thought about how do you reach these applications that are browser-based applications or mobile applications?
Uh, trying to figure out how to word this. That's an exact use case Otto and I talked about at length in the working group, along with Shane and even Tim. Uh, the partnership with the OS is like Apple, for example. If the app is running on the OS and the OS supports it, there is a native way to push that distributed into native apps, for example, browsers. There's some interesting work being done by Google specifically, where they will be supporting shared signals to do session revocation and in the browser. So you make it the problem of the browser and the OS, not the apps consuming it. And it
Yeah.
sounds very it sounds very like next generation ish, but it's not.
Sam Goto from the Chrome team said that when they think about features, it's 10 years. Like they're thinking the stuff that they're doing now is going to get it in 10 years.
So
And
they have
Google is
this.
actually the most agile, I would say. Like
Yeah,
Firefox takes even longer, and the other ones take even longer. Google, I feel like my case about there's this idea. I know that the government wants to break Chrome out of Google. I think that's insane.
don't
Um,
do that, please.
yeah, I think it's insane because, first of all, every other big tech company, Apple has a browser, Microsoft has a browser, but Google can't have a browser? That's crazy. And besides that, they're doing the best work in security. I believe that Google Chrome has the most advanced security. Like if you want the most advanced passkey features or the most advanced verifiable, that's going to be
Yeah.
Chrome. So I love the work that they're doing. It's interesting that you say that I think people sometimes conflate sessions and tokens. And for me, sessions are always about the browser, about a browser a cookie, let's say. And tokens are always, it's normally a JWT or even if it's a reference token, it's sort of referencing a back channel stuff. Um, so you say that they are thinking about making like a shared signals, I guess, a receiver in the browser, specifically about sessions. And Google has a number of credential APIs. There's passkey, there's social login, and there's
Mhm.
also a new W3C effort called credential management, I think, or credential manager. It's got a terrible name. It's very undifferentiated, but it's a really interesting idea to build a new identity layer that enables them to liberate from cookies, because a lot of SSO today is based on cookies, and cookies are also used for third-party tracking. So there's what an IDP third-party tracking cookie or an IDP cookie looks a lot like a third-party tracking cookie, and they're trying to
Correct.
build a new sort of infrastructure around this. But where would this fit in exactly? If a browser was to become a shared signal receiver?
It could eventually lead to like how we rethink of SSO. So if you take into account shared signals as the transport and
Yeah.
the identification being an MDL or a VC, there you go.
I'm starting to think that the browsers need to get away from the session cookies and move to tokens. The
100%.
browser itself uses a token because we have a mechanism for token expiration, and maybe we could get out of some of this business of having this special infrastructure for browser sessions if the browser just used a token. Why can't the browser just obtain a normal
You said
token?
I want to go back to what you said too about like no address space in apps. Um, Speaking from use cases, talking to other companies about shared signals, there are companies out there now that have native apps that do introduce polling for revocation.
Mhm.
It's there. I think you're talking more about how do you push to a non-addressable space,
Exactly.
correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So that's why you have to have a transceiver. So that's how you would do it. You would have to have them pull, which is why as a transmitter, pushing is a lot easier to build. Pull is a lot, I'll say harder. It's a longer tail to realize. But most applicability here, if you want to go use case heavy and hit the 80 percentile, if you're building a transmitter and you can push to your IDPs, that's 80%. Because like it or not, most application developers, most engineers, most SaaS systems tie the session to the IDP. They just do. I mean,
Yeah.
Okta has it in the OIN. Microsoft has it in their tokens. Ping has it in theirs too. So it's like if you're in with one of the big three IDPs, if you kill the session at the IDP, you're 80%. Aside from the custom apps, you're 80% in most SaaS apps. You are.
Um,
That's what I like to call the kill chain. Like if I hit one, I can fan out to all of them. That's also assuming a lot of your infrastructure and a lot of your architecture is built off of and predicated upon your IDP controls your session. It's a good general practice, but you also have every asterisk in the book you can write on this page is like, it's a good guide, but every company may do it differently. Some may be more prescriptive, some may be more open. Some companies have 15 IDPs. Awesome. I don't want to work there. It's not fun, but it's life, right?
While I agree that the IDP is the authoritative session, it has been a unsolved industry problem to do federated logout. It's been everyone's dream that you kill the session at Okta and all of the apps to log you out, but that hasn't really been the reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I do truly think though that shared signals in CAEP with partnership from a lot of SaaS providers and even like, let's just say big players in the operating system space, and not calling anybody out specifically, it's going to take a village to do this. But I think if you want to do this standards-based interoperable, it is achievable because we have the, in the working group, we're all talking to the right people about it. And that's just a matter of like timeline, priorities, road mapping, you know, productizing things, but it's going to be there. I'm all in on it, if you couldn't tell.
I wonder if you're, I'm getting a little bit, I got a little bit of feedback on your last response. I wonder if, are your iPad or your iPods maybe running out of battery?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, but I'm getting a little feedback on your, I'm hearing you, but there's a little bit of feedback. Are you using a laptop? Can you switch the mics maybe?
I can, yeah.
Sorry to do midstream. Let's just go one more second, and I'll do one more question, and we'll see.
Okay.
So so we're talking about logout. Now let's pivot to continuous authentication. I know we're really at the end here, but continuous authentication really shared signals might come back with a risk score. The app has to make a decision whether that risk score actually warrants re-authentication or stronger authentication. And so is shared signals really a solution for continuous authentication, or an ideal situation, how would you see shared signals being part of continuous authentication?
I'm going to answer all those questions in opposite order. Okay.
And your audio sounds better now. Maybe somebody had the microwave on for a second or something.
Who knows? Okay. It's the gremlins, right? So it's in the name, continuous access evaluation profile. It is not going to be your solve to reauth or this, and that, but policy-based approach with a CAEP profile, with shared signals, coupled with the right, I'm calling them appliances. Think of them like as your IDPs or your auth providers, could do it. You're saying continuous authentication. I like to think of it as continuous identity, and here's why. I don't know how much longer authentication is going to be secure, if you will. Passkeys aside, web authent aside, for those people who, there's two camps of people who love passkeys and hate passkeys. There's no middle ground. It's like you love them or you hate them, and it is what it is. I think we're moving towards verification. I think identity verification is the future of proofing. Like, that's why I'm big on verifiable credentials and MDLs. Whatever wins, right? That said, there's a lot of things you can do in CAEP that get you to continuous auth, to where you should not have to log in as often, if ever, if you come from the same device, same location, same access patterns. A lot of this has to do with in play into ITDR as well. But like, I'm giving a keynote with Andrew Cameron from GM at Identiverse on continuous identity and doing the workshop. So we can talk about it way more in depth, in detail there if you're going, but I'll give you the primer here. Continuous auth is a grain of sand on the beach of continuous identity. If anyone wants to steal that and trademark it, by all means, go for it. It just made it up. I don't think CAEP alone and shared signals alone can do this, but that can be your policy, your transport, and your rule set. 100% it can be. It's just
Well, it's
based
input to
on this.
policy, right?
I'm sorry, what?
It's input to policy, really.
Could be policy too. It just depends on how mature or immature your organization is. A policy could be, if I get CAEP event, do this. That's a policy, right?
Yeah. Well, still, you're relying on the CAEP event as input. Your policy is, if I see this CAEP event, I do this. That's your policy. And the CAEP event is actually the input to the policy. It's the control, but it's the input.
In your CAEP event, you could decorate the event envelope that says assurance level down, please do this. So you could embed your policy in your event. Not saying you should or you shouldn't, but that's why the event section in the set is very open, to where
Yeah.
if I wanted to send a prescriptive policy to an application like your app, Mike, can say,
Yeah.
yeah, it says this, but I'm telling you, you should do this.
I
You
still
can't.
think
That's why
that's
I'm saying
input. Ultimately, it's up to the application to take that, run the policy, see if it's trusted, and then actually do it. So it's
you could
really
do it both. You could do it
input.
both ways, and let me explain why. You are right. Agree with you. There are some companies out in the world that don't trust policy, and they're just going to say, you're going to do this. Like, you're doing this now. And it isn't like, I'm not touching the policy engine. I'm saying, if you get this in the application, go do it. I've seen both, and I've seen them both 50-50 as well. So
We're hitting 40 minutes went fast.
oh my gosh, it did.
So
It did.
actually, I wanted to dive down a little more into continuous authentication, but you are talking at Identiverse. And I also want to encourage the audience. There's a LinkedIn page for each episode, the theater page with the actual video from this episode. That's a good place for us to have more of a conversation. I answer all the questions that come on that, or I comment on. I don't know if I answer the questions, I at least comment. So that's a good place to have a further discussion. But Sean, before we break, any last thoughts or action items?
Yeah, with continuous identity, I think what there's many ways to just scope this out, and how you can do it. It's more of a paradigm, and how you implement it is it's interesting now. It's very nascent. It's very new. It's powerful. A lot of companies are doing it in pockets. It's my contention and my belief that in the continuous identity mindset, you have feature sets like with security, intelligence, access management, and identity management. How you power that, think of it like a huge graph, right? Not a graph database, but just a graph of things. The lifeblood of how you communicate via continuous identity to all your appliances and all your orchestration events, it really goes back down to what Ian Glazer wrote with modern identity. There's a new paradigm with policy, orchestration, signals, events, and actions or execution. It's trying to bring together all of the old IAM stuff into event-driven architecture, event-driven approaches. I do think the lifeblood of powering that can be shared signals. What those signals look like depends on your environment, depends on your organization, but that's where I think the industry is going. So the more we can get behind shared signals, whether it be in authentication, proofing, verification, access, and the more appliances in IAM that adopt it, like the Oktas, the SailPoints, the Azures, the Entras, the better off we are. Because right now, it's hard to go all into one product. It's a myriad of things. So if we can't talk and share signals, we can't ever be secure.
Well, I like that vision, the idea that we're going to, coming back to the original question, that we're going to take security events and put them in tokens and make policies based on tokens. I very
I knew you'd
much
like that.
like
I know
this
you'd like
vision.
that. I know you'd like that, man. It's good.
So with that, I guess we'll have to leave it. Quickly, announcement on the next episode, which I told you was the next episode last time because somehow this one was in my schedule weird. But no, we really are going to talk about privilege access management next time with one of my personal mentors, Reiner Hoba, who actually gave me new insights into federations and trust years ago. He's one of the gurus. So listen to Reiner if you can. And with that, I will say thank you, Sean. Thank you, audience. And we'll see you next time.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Mike.